How do you build leaders who can take over the reins and lead well? This is the Leaders of Transformation podcast. And on this show, we interview difference makers and world changers who are disrupting for good. Thank you for listening. I'm your host, Nicole Jansen, and our guest today is Peter Docker. And I'm really excited to have him on the show today. He is a former senior officer with the Royal Air Force, and he is co author of Find Your Why, along with Simon Sinek and David Mead. And we're going to be talking about his new book, which is excellent, called Leading from the Jumpseat: How to Create Extraordinary Opportunities by Handing Over Control. And if you're watching live, we'd love to hear where you're listening and watching from. So you can post that in the chat. If you have questions for Peter along the way, please post them in the chat. We'll get to them along during our conversation here. And we're just excited to have you here. As I said, I'm really, really looking forward to this conversation because the book that I read from Peter is fantastic. I highly recommend it. Leading from the Jump Seat. Get a copy of that book. You're going to want to not only read it, but you're going to want to share it with your leaders. So, all right, let's bring our guest on. Peter, welcome to the Leaders of Transformation.
Thank you, Nicole. It's fabulous being here.
It's fabulous to have you, and I'm so appreciative of you. I know it's evening for you to be here from your coming from the UK. Tell us a little bit about your backstory. I mentioned about the Royal Air Force. You have accomplished so much. And, I think about even the book, writing the book, Find Your Why, which was a huge success, 420,000 copies sold. So many things that you've been able to accomplish. So kind of give us a little bit of the backstory of how you got to doing all of that and getting to where you are today.
Sure. So thank you for that. I started my career early in the Royal Air Force. I joined when I was in my early 20s and spent 25 years, best part of 25 years in service. And that was an extraordinary experience. I was a pilot. I had the opportunity to lead people in combat. We flew large, unarmed, undefended aeroplanes. So that was an interesting experience, to say the least. And I've done lots of other things as well in the Air Force. I taught at the Leadership Defence College here in the UK. I was a negotiator for the British government with NATO when the Berlin Wall came down, negotiated with your State Department on export licensing, ran a $20 billion program for equipment, did all sorts of things. And it was an extraordinary experience. I was very fortunate. I traveled the world from an early age. But then it was time to move on. So I then spent 3 years as a consultant working in high-risk environments in oil and gas, construction, mining, where typically people got killed or injured. And we helped them lead and create cultures where everyone went home safe. And that took me to the point where I met up with Simon Sinek. And I worked alongside Simon for about seven or 8 years. And as you've already mentioned, co-authored Find Your Why with Simon and David Mead. But then a couple of years ago, I took a step away from Simon because I felt there was more that I needed to focus on and more I wanted to develop. And that's when I started my writing of the latest book, Leading from the Jump Seat, which brings together, I've been so fortunate working with, well over 100 different leadership teams across 93 different countries. And I wanted to bring everything I've learned from my own life, my own mistakes, what I've learned from other people, bring that all together and write it in a form where I could share it with others and hopefully help them to lead better and to create great cultures. So that, in a nutshell, is me over the past, I'm almost 59 there. So I've scooted over quite a few years, but you get the general gist, I'm sure.
Well, and I appreciate that. And wow, so much that you have accomplished, like I said. And so what I love about what you're doing, and when we talk about leadership, I've had a lot of leaders that have been on this show, leadership consultants that have been on this show. And a lot of times what we're talking about is how to be a good leader yourself. And I think that that's really important, that obviously leadership does begin with us. But then what you talk about, leading from the jump seat, is from a different perspective, which of course encompasses the how you lead yourself, but it also then uh, addresses the issue of creating this environment for other leaders to thrive and grow. So it's not necessarily about, which I'm a big believer in, is that leadership is not about just gaining more followers, but it is actually about building
Mm.
other leaders. And so, so talk about your new book and what led you to hone in on this particular area of
Sure.
leadership, and maybe some of the overall aspects of it, and then we can dive into some of the nitty gritty details of it. I know that, for example, you talk about in the book the 4 stages of leadership, and I love the way the book is actually
Mm.
outlined like that. So maybe just kind of unpack that a little bit for us.
Sure. And to that point, Nicole, the book is very much a how-to book. Yes, there's lots of stories from my background, which sets the context for each idea and concept that I share, but it's very practical. And perhaps I'll start actually by explaining what I mean by leading from the jump seat and where that title came from, because not everybody knows what a jump seat is. And this goes back to my flying time in the Royal Air Force when I flew large passenger jets at the time, carrying around about 140 people. And I'd just been checking a new captain. He'd been a first officer or co-pilot for many years, and he had just completed his training to become a captain. And the last part of that was where a senior guy, such as myself, would monitor them as we flew from A to B to C to D. And so it was with this young chap called Callum. And we'd flown from London over to Washington, Dulles, and then on to San Francisco, which, as you know, is a very busy airport. And I watched Callum as he flew into San Fran. He did a great job, and we texted in shutdown. It's with great pleasure I was able to turn to him and say, Callum, wonderful job. I'm signing you up. You're fully certified. Tomorrow, you can fly us back towards Washington. I'll be down the back with the other passengers. You'll have a regular first officer with you. So well done. And it was a great moment. And we came back the following morning, and I was reading a magazine, and Callum came over to me. He said, "Excuse me, sir," because I was his senior boss, and that's how he called me in the Royal Air Force, how he referred to me. But he said, "Look, it's very, very busy in rush hour at San Fran." He said, "Can you come and sit on the jump seat to act as an extra pair of eyes to watch out as we're taxiing out, watch out for other aircraft?" And I said, "Yeah, good idea, Callum." I thought it was a very courageous move because he just got me off his back. I'd been checking him for a long period, but no, he was in service of the safety of the aeroplane. It made sense to get somebody else to sit on the jump seat. Now, the jump seat is a seat on the flight deck of many large aircraft. It's immediately behind the 2 pilot seats. When you're sat there, you can touch the pilots. And that's where he wanted me to sit. It's normally empty, but a crew member like myself can hitch a ride home, that sort of thing. So I sat in, I strapped myself in, and I had a great view out. And we started up the aircraft, and Callum taxied out. And he had no problem at all, as I knew he wouldn't. And we lined up on the runway, and we had clearance for takeoff. And we thundered down that runway and got airborne. And then around about 300 or 400 feet, we had an emergency. And what I then chose to do in the next 2 seconds would dictate whether we, the 140 people on board, survived or not. And, many of us might have a thought in our mind as to what we might do, try and intervene or help in some way. But what I actually did, Nicole, was I sat there with my hands in my lap, perfectly calm, and did absolutely nothing. And the reason for that was I'd signed up Callum the day before as a fully certified captain. He had the training, he had the skill. What I needed to do in that moment was not to lead, but to become a great follower. For Callum to feel that I had his back. And when people feel that someone has got their back, that empowers them to do what they need to do and to be who they needed to be. And here I am standing here now, and obviously the situation worked out fine. But that gave me the notion of leading from the jump seat, because, at some stage in life, whether we're a CEO, a team leader, or even a parent, where our kids grow up and leave home, at some stage we're going to retire, we're going to move to a different team, we're going to move on. We are going to let go of control. It's an inevitability. So leading from the jump seat is all about preparing and leading in a way so as we set others up to take forward those things that we feel are really important. You know, jump seat leadership is not about increasing or retaining your own power. It's about empowering others. And when we lead intentionally in that way, it opens up a whole range of extraordinary opportunities that accelerate our team forward, not just when we leave, but whilst we're actually there too. So that's the genesis of leading from the jump seat. And there are a number of practices that we can dive into of how we can practice leading from the jump seat, and depending on where we are in life and what we're doing at the moment in terms of our jobs or careers.
I love that story. I love that story. I remember you sharing it in the book and even when we were talking previously. And I thought, wow, how many leaders would be willing to actually do absolutely nothing? And in the chat, actually, I see here that Martin, who is a regular attender, participant in this live stream, is just saying, wow, what a great story. Charles said, doing nothing is my favorite leadership action. And I love that. Thank you, Charles. And thank you, Martin, for being here as well. And, I just think about how often, leaders want to take back the control. Like maybe I didn't make the right decision. If let's say if somebody like you waited, right? But sometimes even if people make mistakes, the first thing that people want to do as a leader is to say, well, maybe I need to take it. If it is to be, it's up to me. If I want it done right, I got to do it myself.
Yeah.
And it's just a very different paradigm that is to think about leadership as my purpose. My goal is to be an effective leader and equip others because I'm not going to be here forever. And so you've got to take that ego out of it. And I know you talk a little bit about in the book about different qualities of leadership in leading from the jump seat. What are some different qualities? So where would be the best place for us to start to kind of unpack this? I know we talk about, you talk about being humble. You talk about a stand versus position. Where would be the best place that we would direct this for our listeners who are kind of going, I haven't thought about it that way. I've heard a lot of leadership consultants and people talking and even podcasts talking about how to become a great leader myself and maybe empowering and allowing people to be the best that they could be in their role. But now you're talking about something much different. You're talking about not just for them to be good at what they do, but actually to step into the role and to step into your shoes and even be better than you were.
Yeah. So it's all about creating the space into which others can step, to pick up on your language there, Nicole. And also you mentioned the thing called ego, which can be like the bear on our back. I'm going to come back to that because there's an antidote to ego. But before we can get to that, we really need to start at the beginning, which is the person in the mirror. What gives you the humble confidence? I'll say more about humble confidence in a moment. What gives you the humble confidence to let go is being clear on what you believe in, what's really important to you, because that gives you the confidence and the courage to let go. So let me explain that a little bit more, because when I say what's really important to you, I'm not talking about the latest iPhone or your pay rise or whatever. No, what's deeply important to you. For example, for most of us, family is very important. And I was on a call a couple of years ago, and on a video call, I got a phone call from my wife, Claire, and she told me she'd just been involved in a car accident. Now, I stopped my phone call, the video call I had. Everybody understood. I went straight to help my wife. Nothing would have got in my way because family is important to me. And what I find interesting is the energy that releases inside of you. I was stepping into the unknown, but there was no hesitation. I was out the door. So it made me think, well, what else is really important to us as individuals? It'd be different for each and every one of us. Because if we can put that into words and we can harness that same energy, it gives us a tremendous reservoir to lead in different situations, particularly when we're in unknown situations or we don't know the answer to the challenges that face us. Now, how we discover what's really important to us, well, the clues are in the choices that we make. Almost 40 years ago today, I went to university to study computer science and electronic engineering. Now, I had no background in those subjects at all, but I was absolutely committed to going and studying those. Why? Because at the time I saw that those subjects would give me the best chance of getting a well-paid job in the marketplace where I could help to support my parents who, had lost their jobs and were very short of money. I didn't want to be a burden on anybody else. I wanted to be able to support others. But then halfway through that degree course, something else happened in the world, which was the Falkland Islands, which is a British territory down the South Atlantic, was invaded. And it was nothing to do with the politics of the situation. It was the fact that someone was imposing their will on others against their will that lit a fire inside of me. And so I left university to join the Royal Air Force because I wanted to be in a position, part of an organization that could help others who couldn't help themselves. So out of those two experiences came two things which are really important to me. One is being able to support others and not being on a burden to others. And two, the notion of mutual respect. These are deeply important to me, and it lights a fire inside of me. So when I haven't got the answer to what's going on around me, these and others act as a handrail to guide me. And when we're then leading others, it helps us first to lead ourselves. But when we go on to lead others in unknown situations, as I have been, for instance, in extreme situations like combat situations, where you don't know everything that's going on, you don't know whether you're going to get through it, being able to latch onto those drivers, those things that light that fire inside of you, is so valuable. And it allows you, well, it builds what we would call character, because these are what you stand for. And people start to recognize that. And as you become consistent with that, people know how to relate to you. And then you will have the confidence to open up and allow others who believe what you believe to help you figure out the solutions to the challenges you face. All starts here.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we think about and talk about oftentimes the motive, the why that motivates you, we think about missions. We think about could be material things like you were talking about. It's not really the car. Some people do think about those things, but you think about it for as a mission of something that drives behavior. And what you're talking about is actually values of what's important.
Well,
can you unpack that a little bit
yeah,
more? Yeah.
Actually, yeah, because, as I was thinking about all this when I was writing the book, values aren't as fixed as we might like to think they are.
Mm.
We might consider ourselves to be courteous and thinking of others. But I tell you, if you're driving to a really important business meeting and you get to the parking lot and there's one space left and you're late for your meeting, or you're going to be late, there's one space left and you see someone else out the corner of your eye who's hunting for that parking space, you're going to take that parking space. You might feel a bit bad about it, but you're going to take it because you want to be in time for your meeting. So this is where values start sometimes to get a little bit fuzzy. This is why I like to talk about drivers. And that's another word for what I was describing a moment ago in terms of my drivers of mutual respect, not being a burden on others, family, and we can have a lot of these. And when we get clear on them, they become what I call stands. And there is a difference between a stand and a position. And thinking this way really helps, I find. So a position is against something. And we don't have to look very far in today's world to hear people spouting lots of positions. They're against this, they're against that, they're against the other. But the thing about a position is that it depends on a counter position to exist. A stand, on the other hand, is for something. It's what we stand for. We can have lots of different stands, but it doesn't depend on anyone or anything else. So I'll give you an example. We have a narrow street leading into our village here in the countryside, and there's only enough width for one car to pass at a time. And sometimes you'll get two cars meeting head on, bumper to bumper, fender to fender, and they'll stop. And each of the drivers will take up a position against the other one. And their position will sound like, well, you are going too fast, you need a backup, or my journey is more important than yours. And they become more and more entrenched in their positions and nothing moves. But let's say we have the same situation, but one of those drivers, she has a stand, and that stand is for being courteous on the road. And she immediately reverses up to a passing place and lets the other driver go on through. Immediately, this other driver, his position dissolves because there's no longer any counter position. But the lady who reversed up to that passing place, her stand is strengthened. Not dependent on anybody else, it's about her. Now, when we get clear on what we stand for, we can then use those as the basis of a commitment to get into action and do certain things, driven by that drive, that power inside of us that I mentioned earlier, to overcome the challenges that we face. And so I like to talk more about drivers rather than values, because values can shift just a little bit. They can depend on circumstance, but drivers, deep down, they stay with us. They are a constant. Those are the non-negotiables.
So, what about, I'm just thinking about a leader that might be listening and they maybe have the intention, right, of mutual respect. They value their own family. They value, things that are good, right, and true, and yet in the moment they're in the boardroom and they feel like I have the authority. I'm going to make the decisions. We're driving. Talk about drivers. We're driving towards an outcome for this company. I have stakeholders, shareholders that are, that are expecting me to hit certain metrics. I've got, in your case, going into combat, and it's like people's lives are at stake here, or there is a mission, and maybe you don't even agree with the mission, and you have been tasked though to go in and do something. How do you what would you say to those leaders that are kind of in that position where they seem to be in conflict? So I have my position, or I have my stand, but I've got now a team that I've got to rally around that stand, which they may not have. They may not have the same passion for that I have, or they may not agree with what I'm, you know, committed to, or what the mission of the company is as it relates to them. So how do they navigate through that without just saying, well, this is the way it is, deal with it?
Yeah. Well, there are two things that immediately come to mind there, Nicole. So let's unpack that a little bit, because, well, let's start with this. Everything that's important to us, everything is driven by one of two things. They're either driven by fear or they're driven by love. Now,
yes.
Whenever I mention the love word, particularly in the context of business, people can get a little bit twitchy because we can be uncomfortable about that. But I'll come back to that in a minute. Let's deal with fear first of all. Fear is a natural reaction when our life is threatened. Fear is what has us, when we step out into the street and a car's coming, we jump back because we're in fear of our lives and it can save our life. But most of the times, thankfully, that's not an issue for us. But fear can also be triggered when our livelihood, our status, or our reputation is under threat. And when those three things are threatened, fear can show itself in a different form. It can show itself as, well, actually, ego is the most prominent one. Ego means I, it's me, it's Greek for I. And instead of thinking about others, we close down and it's all about myself. I've got to protect my livelihood, my status, my reputation. We stop thinking about others. We start seeing the world as a place of scarcity where there's got to be a winner and losers, and we're going to be the winner. But the thing is, we have a choice, and we can choose instead to be driven by love. Now, Love is not about necessarily going and hugging everybody. It's not about that at all. Love can show up in lots of different ways. In a business context, love shows up as, well, seeing the world as a place of opportunity and possibility rather than scarcity. It's about, instead of ego, it's about using the antidote to ego, which is humble confidence. And humble confidence is about being absolutely resolute in where we're going, being willing to take decisions when they need to be taken, but also being willing to listen to others. And when we have the confidence that comes with knowing what we stand for and our commitments, it gives us the ability to lead from a place of love, where we continue to think about others. We always have that choice, fear, love. And the challenge or the opportunity is the thing that links the two, which is courage. Courage cannot exist without fear, but it can only be sustained through love. Okay, so this is the first
Say
thing.
that
I'm going
again.
to hold on to that for a moment.
Say
the
that
love
again.
fear thing.
Yeah.
Coming back. Yeah.
Courage. You said say
Sorry,
that.
did you
So
ask me to
say that
say-
again. Courage, because I think that's a really important piece here. You just said courage is driven by what?
Courage cannot exist without fear, but it can only be sustained through love.
I like that. It's good.
I'll give you an example to bring this to life. Back in 2003, I led 200 people during the Iraq War, and we were flying large, unarmed, undefended aircraft, air refuelers. Our job was to refuel fighter jets. And we flew around in circles, and the enemy would shoot at us from the ground, which was a bit irritating, but, it's part of the job. And I remember the night before, the day before the first action, I had to give my people something to focus on, because, as you'll no doubt remember at the time, there were demonstrations around the world against the impending war. And that puts you in a very uncomfortable position when you're in the military. When you sign up to the military, you don't say, I agree to do my duty, except see footnotes 1 through 10. No, there aren't any conditions. You're there to do your duty. And I had to pull the signal out of all the noise, the signal being the thing that people could hold on to, because the natural reaction would be one of fear. They're going to be flying into the line of fire, putting themselves in harm's way. So we had a photograph the day before in front of the aircraft, and I had all my people, I gathered them around in a big donut, and I didn't know what I was going to say, but I turned to the aircraft technicians and just let the words come out. I turned to them and I said, look, your job is to keep these 40-year-old airplanes flying. I know we don't have the spares or whatever, but you've got to keep them serviceable, so as the aircrew, the pilots and the aircrew can do their job. I then turned to the aircrew and I said, your job is to fly every mission that we're given, because our mission is to refuel fighter jets. Unless we refuel those fighter jets, our troops on the ground, the American, Australian, and British troops on the ground, won't get their air support. If they don't get their air support, they're going to die. That was the hard truth of the matter. Now, what I didn't realize this was happening, but that gave people the focus they needed. Now, it gave them the opportunity. They wouldn't have used so many these words, but it gave them the opportunity to choose love over fear. The fear would have been, I'm not going to get in that aeroplane. But they found courage, which was sustained through love of the servicemen in similar uniforms who they'd never met, who are absolutely relying on them for their lives on the ground in Iraq. So this is what I talk about when we have the choice. Everything that's important to us is driven by either love or fear, but we have that choice. Instead of being driven by fear, we can be driven instead by love, and that is sustainable. And if we're leading a group of people, regardless of our situation, if we can focus first on being sourced from a place of love rather than fear, and secondly, draw out that signal from the noise, the clear, simple message. Management is about handling complexity, but leadership is about creating simplicity. And that starts with finding that signal. What are we doing here? What do we need to focus on? Now, I give the military example because I think it acts as a, well, it inoculates against people thinking that love is this warm, fluffy thing. No, it's vitally important in the most extreme of human circumstances. It's vitally important when I was flying passenger jets and we had an emergency. We sourced ourselves not from fear, which would have us freeze, but from love, from the drive to get that aircraft on the ground safely so as everybody could walk away. So this is vitally important. So to answer your question, if we find ourselves in those situations where we have lots of pressures, and it's very easy to go with fear, identify where we can source ourselves from love, and then pull out that clear signal that everyone can latch onto, tune into, if you will. And that will allow us to lead our way through the unknown and the challenges that we face.
I love that. I love that. Thank you. And, when you talk about fear and love, it's one of my favorite topics, actually, because this whole idea of scarcity versus abundance, and coming from that place of we're only ever coming from fear or love at any moment in time. We can start with fear, but it immediately has to flip to love, to have that courage. And I love what you said there about fear will cause us to freeze or run off, and the flight or freeze mode. Love unlocks that courage. That's why I wanted you to emphasize that, because I think that's really powerful. The other thing I would love for you to talk about is, how do you know when someone is actually ready to lead well? So we're talking about handing over the reins to someone else and having them lead well. They may be competent, but are they ready? So how do you know? What sort of things do you look for to know that not only do they have the skills, but they have, because leadership is a lot more than just competence.
Oh, I totally agree. It's going back to the story of Callum, the captain out of San Francisco with that emergency. It wasn't as if we just thrown him into that situation. He'd had months of training and checks along the way. So we knew that he was capable. He had all the skills that he needed. And well, that's the first thing I'd say. We need to train our people so as they're equipped, and constantly asking the question, do you have everything that you need, whether that's physical things or whether it's training and competency? We need to help them on that journey. That's all about lifting them up. And it's a process. I'll tell you another quick story, which I think illustrates the point. I was flying into Gander in Newfoundland. I was the captain, and I had a fellow first officer co-pilot with me. And the weather wasn't that great. And but he was flying, and he was doing an okay job. And when you're flying the approach to a runway, at most international airports, you've got 4 lights on the side of the runway, and these lights can shine either red or white. Now, when you're on the correct angle of approach, they will shine 2 white and 2 red. That's good. If they show 3 white and 1 red, that means you're going too high. If they show 3 red and 1 white, you're going too low. If they show 4 red, you're way too low, and you're no longer safe on that approach. You could hit something. So we're flying this approach, or rather, John was flying the approach, and we had 2 red, 2 white lights. That's good. But then we went to 3 red. We were getting low. So I called it out, and John acknowledged, but he didn't take any action. The action he should have taken was to apply a little bit more power on the engines, but he didn't do that. So we continued, and I started to see them going to 4 red lights, going way too low. At that stage, I called it out again that he was low. He didn't take the action, but what I did was just went to the throttles and pushed them forward a little bit, calling out as I did so. And we corrected onto the correct flight path, the approach path, and we landed safely. Now, the thing about that story, it's what I call what's your 4 red lights moment. Because we'd trained John, he was competent, but we don't always get it right all the time. So how do we avoid taking back control? Because if I'd taken back control at that moment, it would prick his balloon of confidence, and that could have taken months to recover. But so often in business, we grab back control too early, and it shatters the confidence of the other individual. So I talk about what's your 4 red lights moment. And what I mean by that is know the point at which, if you don't now take back control, the situation spirals out such that you cannot recover it. In my case, if I hadn't made an intervention there, it would have gotten beyond the stage where I'd be able to recover the safety of the aircraft. And, I had all the other people on the aircraft to think about. But when you know what that is, when you're approaching that point, make the smallest intervention that you need to make to correct the situation, whilst not taking back control if you can possibly avoid it. And I list all these different things to consider in terms of taking back control when the person isn't quite performing as you need them to perform. I mean, one of the things is, does it really matter? Quite often things don't matter. It's not a life or death situation. It's just our own ego which causes us to jump in and take control because we can do it better. But if we always jump in and take control before we absolutely have to, people aren't going to learn. The lovely thing about this story, my son Patrick is a pilot with the Royal Navy. And much earlier on, when he was going through his training, he came to me one day, he said, "Oh, there was a guy, part of one of the instructors training me, he knows you." I said, "Oh yeah, who's that then?" He told me his name. It was the guy I call 4 Red Lights John. And this guy who I had to help going into Gander, he subsequently went on to become a captain. He subsequently went on to become a flying instructor. And umpty-ump years later, there he was helping to train my own son to be a pilot, So that was a wonderful circular thing for me. It just shows that by taking the smallest action when people trip up a little bit, we can help build them up. I refer to it as well as the opportunity in these moments when people make a mistake or don't quite get it right. There's an opportunity to either spiral up or spiral down. The actions we can take have them spiral down, and that doesn't serve anybody. Or we can think, right, how can I help this individual spiral up? And when we can do that, it lifts them up and they become subsequently great leaders and great performers.
Oh, I love that story. And I love how it ends with because when you think about somebody like that, you're like, okay, well, how did they do later? Because you weren't going to be there all the time to help them. And so I love to hear how, when you mentor someone, as you have done so many times, that it's just great to see them many years later and to look back and see how they've grown and how they've flourished in that position because of how you mentored them and equipped them to do that. So that is awesome, Peter. Thank you so much. There are so many questions. I would love for you to share stories about because I know you've got tons of great stories. I'm just going to recommend to our listeners to go get a copy of your book because there's lots of awesome stories in there. If you liked this conversation, enjoyed some of the examples, the book is full of them. And if you want to learn more about even Peter's experience in the Royal Air Force and some of the early days experiences of Peter flying, and I know you flew the Prime Minister around and you've had some really incredible opportunities there. I'm just going to recommend everybody just go get a copy of Leading from the Jump Seat. You can get that book on Amazon. You can also go to leadingfromthejumpseat.com is the website. I also recommend you follow Peter on LinkedIn and of course, his name, Peter Docker. You can find him there. Highly encourage you. That's going to be a book that you're going to want to, as I said in the beginning, you're going to want to share that with others so that it's a different way of leading that isn't about you. And we talk about the ego throughout this conversation. It's really, it goes beyond that, getting the ego out of the way and doing what is right, doing right for the people that are on the plane or in the business, the stakeholders, the people that work there, the people that have the interest, the customers and everything. But it's more than that. So get a copy of the book. and highly encourage you that. One last thing before we wrap up. Uh, this is episode 404 of the Leaders of Transformation. And so there are 400 other episodes that are available on the leadersoftranformation.com website. I highly encourage you to take advantage of that. Some amazing leaders and difference makers. So please go check that out. Also, something that I did not mention in the beginning, if you are a leader, obviously Peter does consult as well. If you're, and I know he does that at the very highest levels of business and executives around the world. If you are looking to be better, do better, and make a greater impact, you can also book a one-on-one consult with myself. You can find me at leadersoftranformation.com/coaching. There's details there. If you're more on the entrepreneurial side and are looking for, you're a purpose-driven entrepreneur and you're looking for some guidance and direction in that, then you can reach out. So there's lots of resources. This is a perfect example. Lots of resources, whether it's Peter, whether it's myself, whether it's any of the other guests that we've had on the show. Just make sure you take advantage of this. And the whole goal here is to help you become the leader of transformation that you are capable of being. Okay, so we'd love to hear your stories. Again, as I said, you can go on leadersoftranformation.com. Reach out to me there. Let me know what you're up to. Let me know what you're planning to do. And if you need support on that, if there's topics that we haven't addressed on this show that you would like us to address, let us know. And we'll look at bringing on guests that address that as well. So we appreciate you being here. Join us next week because we have another guest next Tuesday. You can join us live, or you can wait for the replay, which I know many of you do. Wait for the replay to come out, and please share it with your friends and people that want to make a difference and want to be better leaders, because that's, again, what this show is all about. So again, thank you for being here. Peter, again, thank you for being here as well. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Leaders of Transformation real soon.